Yeah. Well, unless either of you want to add to that, I think we've run out of time, and that means we've also run out of time for questions from the floor. So I apologise to everybody about that, but I'm sure you'll join with me in thanking our two excellent conversationalists for a really deep and profound insight into the thinking of the trade union movement at the present time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I think he's making the point that it's runs to 8:30.
What? I thought it was finished at 8. Have we got till 8:30?
Why can't we have any participation from the audience?
I'm happy to stay to that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Oh, right, sorry. Well, let's carry on then. Let's carry on. Well, maybe this is a good opportunity to invite a couple of questions from the floor. At the back there.
Does this microphone? Yeah, it does. Okay, it works. Hi. Thanks to both of you, first of all. My question is that Christine mentioned that the Tories have taken quite a consistent line in the narrative they've created about the current crisis and said, it's Labour's mess that they left behind. But something else which they've talked about is they've made this quite neat example of the government budget being like a household budget, and therefore you don't put yourself in more debt when you're trying to pay down debt. And not only is it economically illiterate, it's also a lie. Now there are some mainstream commentators like Will Hutton and David Blanchflower who've said from the outset it's all wrong, and they've tried to argue against it, but I don't think either of them are probably the most accessible of writers to get that message across. And I just wondered if you could come up with a counter example, a bit like the bank robbers one that Mark came up with, which could defeat that idea.
Well, we'll take a couple of questions before I put it to our panellists, but can I ask everybody to identify themselves, including yourself?
Sorry, I'm Russell Fraser. I'm a member of the Haldane executive. I should probably say, in interest of full disclosure, I'm a former special educational needs officer at Brent Council, GMP top steward, now a lawyer, and also a member of the Labour Party.
Okay. Who's next? Yes, the lady there, yeah, please.
We can hear. We can hear, all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What unions could do.
Just introduce yourself first, please.
What unions could do is be providing information that exposes neoliberal strategy better. For public consumption, not just for unions. So it's clear that the aim is privatise, liberalise public services with cheap labour, neoliberal aim. So three things that do need better explanation in public. The first one is just the principle of liberalisation. That it's about opening public and private sector to transnational investment. Now, that's a pretty simple concept, but it's never out there as a singular overall concept for people to understand in those terms. The second one is public procurement, and that when we talk about public services, they're part of the bigger picture of public procurement, and the fact that there is a global grab for public procurement, not just as an ideological thing, but there is actually a global procurement agreement as a trade agreement pushing things in that direction. There's a new regulation in Europe, in the EU, to harden public procurement liberalisation within the EU. So I think it's useful for people to understand that if their public service job or the NHS is a part of a big jigsaw, a global jigsaw, it's for transnational investment access to government spending at all levels globally. That's what's actually going on. The third one that I've mentioned is something that a lot of union people and left people don't want to talk about very much, but it's the structures that are being set up to allow cheap labour through trade agreements for the Mode 4 stuff. And the cuts, the obvious answer to cuts is going to be outsourcing, I mean, that's thrown around all the time. But it will be outsourcing with cheap temporary migrant labour pool, particularly with the structure of the EU-India free trade agreement. That's wide open for it. The UK points-based system is set up for it. No numerical limits on it. Both your unions are very, very susceptible to this. Teachers are a target that the Indian press is talking
Okay,
about.
I don't want to cut you off, but I want to get some other people in. I think you've made your 3 points. Indeed, you've answered your own questions, I think.
Real information and it's about where people are not interested in the EU because they never get any real information about it.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. We'll take one more, yeah. Chap there.
Thanks very much. Brian Knott, I'm from Simpson Miller Solicitors, also involved in Bowling Against the Cuts, which is a sort of a community-based campaigning organisation. I'd be interested, because you've talked a lot about sort of macroeconomics and also the whole situation of the Eurozone and austerity, and also, understandably, you're very involved in challenging things around what interests your members, and that's obviously an important thing to do. How we get trade unions to work better with sort of community organisations that are fighting austerity on the ground in terms of closures to services, to withdrawal of services in terms of disability benefits or around things like asylum seekers. I have to say that both of your unions are actually quite well represented in Birmingham Against the Cuts, but certainly other unions and some of the very big unions could be much more involved at that level, and no union is perfect. So I'd be interested to what you think can be done on that side.
Okay. Well, who'd like to start? Christine?
Okay, I'll start with the providing the information stuff. I think because you are exactly right that one of the things that we absolutely have to do is make sure that we've got clear, straightforward, understandable messages that get out to our members. So at the same time that PCS was publishing their initial leaflet, we were publishing this one, of which I only have a photocopy because it was out of print and I couldn't find one. So there is a real job for teachers' unions, for trade unions to do generally. And you're absolutely right. I omitted to say the maxed out and the credit card mantra, but it is true that they have been very much better than we have about having a really consistent message. Now, we could just keep saying there is an alternative, but I think we have to have something that's slicker than that. And I've been on lots and lots and lots of platforms where I've used all mark stuff about how much tax is avoided, evaded, and then just simply not collected because his members are losing their jobs, and if they were there, they would actually collect some of this money in. So we have got to be consistent about that. And then today at the TUC, we got an interesting paper about how much cash there is lying about in banks and places that could actually be lending this money. Because we do know, I mean, there's tons of stuff that goes on in the States that's a huge problem, but we do know that if you provide some stimulus, it is actually possible to get work going and get small and medium enterprises and so on started. They can't do that if they can't get the cash to do it. So I think there's a big job for the TUC to do and for us to do to get out that basic message that there actually is money here, but it's not being spent in the right places to make sure that the things that need to happen are going to happen. On the question of other types of information, the Education International has done a brilliant piece of research about tax avoidance and tax evasion and third-party countries and all kinds of extraordinary outsourcing things that mean that we would have masses more money in order to support education services globally if these things didn't happen. But it's a piece of research this thick, and what it does need and what's in the process of being done is a kind of popularized version of all of the problems, all of the ways that money is being siphoned off and therefore is not available for the public sector. But it does need to be in manageable chunks. It's absolutely true that there's a big issue about public procurement, and it's absolutely true that, I mean, different from the things you're saying, but actually if the government if the government hadn't cut the Building Schools for the Future programme when it first came in, we would now have far more construction workers in work, and we wouldn't be having to consider whether we need, other kinds of privately financed schools, because we would actually be using the money that was originally set aside in order to do that. I'm not going to say anything at all about Mode 4, because I know that there's massive correspondence between various people and my union about it, and there is a whole department in my union that's looking at Mode 4. What is true is that we cannot have the situation that we've got at the moment, which is that we essentially import teachers. Then we don't pay them properly because they don't apparently meet our qualification standards. And then if they don't get qualified within a certain amount of time, we then just deport them again. So there is a huge problem with teachers coming into this country and being extraordinarily badly treated. I think, Brian, the only way that we can get trade unionists more involved in local community activity is by playing to their self-interest, frankly. I mean, initially, if they're not coming in because they can see the value of the scheme, then you have to say, well, if this school closes or if this school gets privatised, how are your children ever going to be able to find a school to which they can go? Because what is absolutely the case is that, and I know this is happening in Birmingham, where you've got large numbers of schools becoming academies, they can have much more effect on who goes into those schools than the run-of-the-mill comprehensive schools and maintained sector. So if a school goes out of its community, it will have a very bad effect. And we need to drag in people who are not members of education unions to be involved in those things, because they need to defend local services on which they ultimately rely, and which play into, which means that there is actually public provision. So, I mean, I know that my members are extensively involved in Birmingham, and my understanding is that we've also got big buy-in from PCS members there. And I'm bound to say that because the headquarters of the NASUWT happens to be in Birmingham, I think they're probably quite involved too. And notwithstanding the fact that we're in ruthless competition with them for members, the fact is that there are times when we have to put our differences aside and work together in order to make sure you get the best possible campaign that you can. But the fact is, it isn't easy to get people into campaigns. But if we're not able to get them in, then we will simply lose everything. So it's partly a matter of having easily accessible information, and partly a matter of saying to people, these are your services. They're your services. We can't afford for them to be lost.